Some friends of mine gave me a copy of the Quran. And one night I was sitting in Diamond Heights, my apartment in Diamond Heights in San Francisco. I was working that time at the University of San Francisco. I was 27, 28 at that time, I can't remember. Well, I opened the Quran, read the first page, then the second, and then very quickly, in the second surah, about 37 verses into the Quran, I came upon the story of mankind. I have to admit, I read through it very quickly. It was about 9, 10 verses long. Story of the first man and woman. And I recognized some of the details. It was similar to what I had learned when I was a child, but I noticed that there was something wrong. It was apparent to me that whoever authored this Quran, of course I wasn't a Muslim at the time, so I didn't have any idea who that was, whoever authored this Quran clearly did not understand the real meaning of the story, because they had obviously gotten the details confused. They didn't even understand the whole purpose of the story. And so I just read through it once, and then I read through it again, just to try to see what kind of point the author was making, and then I read through it a third time and a fourth, and then I realized this is something strange going on here. I'm going to read this much more carefully. I'm going to need to go through this story line by line, verse by verse, because it's obvious that the author is trying to bring out another point, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, but definitely he packs a lot of meaning into almost every word. And I thought the writer at least seems to have a great measure of brilliance. So I came to the 30th verse of the second surah, Surah Al-Baqarah. See, that's the verse that hooked me. That's the verse that caught my attention. That's the one that kept on making me read the story again and again and again. And it began like this. Behold, your Lord said to the angels, I am going to place a vicegerent on earth. The Arabic word is khalifa. It means a representative or an emissary of mine. And they said, the angels said, will you place therein one who will spread corruption and shed blood, while we celebrate your praises and glorify your holiness? I looked at it again. I couldn't believe the question. Why would you create this violent and pernicious creature when you could create angels? As the angels clearly say, they're asking one of the most fundamental questions in the entire history of religion. I looked at that question and said, that's my question. Not even a single verse into the story of mankind, and there before me I see my question. That whole question, everything that I ever thought, everything that I ever experienced, everything that I ever knew was in that question. It was as if the author took my life and wanted to pick out exactly the right question to humiliate me, to provoke me, to anger me. And then look at the answer. And he said, God said, truly I know what you do not know. You know, in modern parlance, we would say, I know exactly what I'm doing. You can't just get off that easy. You can't just tell me you know exactly what you're doing. Not after what I've been through. Not after you made me this way. And then I realized, of course, I was arguing with a God I didn't even believe in. And that would happen several times as I read through the Quran. And sometimes I would just get into so agitated by what I read, I'd start arguing with this voice that I'm reading before me, that's calling to me. So we turn to the next verse. It turns out that the Quran just doesn't dismiss the question. It starts to answer it a little bit. And in the next verse it says, and he taught Adam, God taught Adam, the names of all things. And then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me their names if you are right. So here we see Adam is not only just a creature who knows how to name things, who's acquiring the gift of language, but he's also a learning creature. God is teaching him. And what did the angels say? In the next verse they say, glory to you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. In truth, it is you who are knowing, the wise. They say this task, this intellectual test that's put before them is beyond their grasp. And he said, oh, Adam, tell them their names. And when he had told them their names, God said, did I not tell you that I know what is unseen in the heavens and the earth? And I know what you reveal and conceal? I looked at that. What question what did they reveal and what did they conceal? I thought about it for a minute. Oh, it's obvious. What did their question reveal? You just go back and look at the question. It revealed the sinful and sinister propensities of man. I mean, it's obvious, right? Why are you all looking at me like that? You're starting to scare me. You're all looking very serious. Am I losing you? Wow. Okay. So, they revealed the sinister and evil propensities of man. But what did their question conceal? And all you have to do is think about it for a minute. Human beings, yes, they could do evil. Yes, they could do wrong. Yes, they could create misery. But they could also do exactly the opposite. They could choose to do evil, they could choose to do tremendous good. Clearly, going back to the angel's question, yes, you have these natural concerns about the creation of mankind. He could do these evil things. But look at this tremendous intellect he has. This is something you have overlooked that you haven't considered. And that's clearly the point of these verses. And up until that point in my life, I, like the angels, that only saw one side of the coin. For the first time when I read that verse, believe it or not, it was an eye-opener for me. I had always been obsessed with the evil potentials of human beings. Even though I felt that the author didn't quite, it was as if I realized that he didn't misunderstand the story. He was taking one of the great stories in the history of humankind, one of the fundamental greatest stories in the history of mankind, and molding it and using it as a vehicle for an entirely original message. So we go on to the next verse. And behold, we said to the angels, bow down to Adam, and they bowed down. But not so Iblis. Iblis is like the father of Satan. He refused and was arrogant. He was of those who reject faith. And notice why Iblis does not bow down. He refuses because he was arrogant. We often hear what's the root of all evil? In the West, it's always money, greed, etc. Here the Quran seems to be saying that the root of all evil is not always material wants. It's not always money, it's not always greed. At the heart of evil is arrogance, putting yourself above all others. I looked at that verse and I said, okay, I get why you would create angels, to sort of influence man in a positive direction. But why in this story now are you introducing Satan? What sort of role was Satan play? And then, of course, you just think about it for a minute and you say, yes, the story is telling us that on one hand we have these magnanimous urgings come from one direction. On the other hand, we have these satanic urgings coming from another direction. In other words, the Quran is telling us that man is not only a learning creature, but he's a moral creature. He has understanding of right and wrong. I noticed that the Quran in this story has a tremendous penchant for understating things. Because it says, and said to Adam, dwell you and your spouse in the garden, and eat freely thereof what you wish, to Adam and his spouse. But come not near this tree, for you will be among the wrongdoers. There's no sense of God being threatened by the possibility of man eating from the tree. The tree that he picks, it seems like he's just picking out any tree. Nothing special about the tree. Satan will later come to him and tell him it's the tree of eternal life. God's not nervous at the prospect at all. In the tradition that I came from, God is threatened by the prospect. He has to put an angel with a fiery sword by to protect the tree so that mankind never goes next to it again. I'm not putting it down, I'm just pointing out the difference of the story. They're both beautifully told. But he has to guard the tree. Why? Because if they eat from it, they'll become gods like us. But here, just, calmly says, but if you do, you will be among the wrongdoers. God is not worried about himself. It's just warning man, making it clear that if you do this, you've committed a wrongful deed. Next verse. But Satan caused them to slip and expelled them from the state in which they were. And we said, go you all down, some of you being the enemies of others, and on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. But when you read these verses for the first time, this is just so much that catches your attention. But Satan caused them to slip. I remember, I couldn't get that verse out of those words out of my head. Satan caused them to slip? To slip? The greatest sin in the history of the human race, and it's called a slip? In my culture, slip means, you just momentarily, for a fraction of a second, you lose your focus. It's not a big deal. My Uncle Bob used to always say to me, Jeff, I'm sorry I'm 5 minutes late, I slipped up. I was expecting now the rage, the anger, the violence, the jealousy. That's what I was expecting. Okay, they eat from the tree. Where's the rage, the violence? But then maybe I was trying to force the traditional understanding, the traditional interpretation. Maybe it was just a slip. After all, they didn't commit murder. They didn't commit robbery, rape. It's not a huge deal. It's not the gravest sin in the history of humanity by any means. It's minor by any standards. But it shows that mankind is ready to act on his